We started digging in last week into the Jewish history. We got as far as the end of the Torah. And what's interesting about the Torah is that if you you analyze the Torah and what it really talks about, you have Genesis, which is basically 2,000, running very quickly, 2,000 years till we reach, about 2,000 years till we reach Abraham. We settle down with Abraham, we talk about him, we talk about his life, we talk about his experiences, we talk about a few episodes with Abraham. We move on to Isaac, we spend some time with Isaac and his relationship with his kids and all the events. We spend significant time with Jacob and Jacob's children. That's basically the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis ends when the children of Jacob die, primarily Joseph. We have the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the last four books of the Torah. And those basically primarily deal with one man. And who's that? Moses. Moshe. And the books end when Moshe dies. The last event that happens in the Torah is the death of Moshe. So we could kind of say almost that the books of the Torah are really kind of like the storyline of the biography of Moses, basically. He's the central figure. And what we say about that is that Moses is kind of the model man. And Moses was someone who perfected himself. Moses was someone who engaged in character development in a degree and a level unparalleled by anyone else. And the Torah is all about this idea of the word Torah means instruction. Instruction for what? Instruction for developing your character, perfecting who you are, becoming the greatest person you could possibly be. Hence, the book of the Torah is demonstrated, is manifested in character and in practice by Moses. Moses is the consummate leader of the Jewish people. He is the unrivaled or unparalleled prophet. I don't know if we mentioned this last week, but there's a difference between the prophecy of Moses and the prophecy of every other subsequent or previous prophet. So the level of prophecy that Ezekiel or Jeremiah or Elijah or Elisha or Abraham, none of those things, it's a different nature, it's a different quality in the prophecy. Moses' prophecy was clear, was lucid, Moses was awake, there was no imagery, it was direct instructions. The Torah says that, or the Midrash points out, says that all the other prophets use the term Ko Amar Hashem, so says God. Moses says Zeh Davar, this is the item, this is the thing. Why? Because prophecy has to go through a certain filter with a prophet. If you're a prophet, right, you're going to get some sort of imagery, some sort of experience, and you're going to have to filter that and try to glean the lesson. That's why the Talmud declares no two prophets speak with the same style. As opposed to Moses, Moses didn't get imagery, Moses didn't get inspiration, Moses got instructions, words, the way you would speak to your fellow, the Almighty speaks to him. And that's important because Moses is the one who's going to give us the Torah. So Moses is the greatest prophet. Moses is the model man. Moses was someone who had to wear a mask, as it says in the end of Exodus. He had to wear a mask because his face was just radiant like the sun. The face of Moses was the face of the sun. Moses, we all saw him as a prophet. The entire nation at the foot of Mount Sinai saw him go up. He doesn't come back for 40 days. He goes back 3 times. He builds the tabernacle. He tells us, he hits the rock and the water comes out of the rock. That's how we drink for 40 years. He tells us about the manna descends from heaven. He is the lifeline, basically, of the Jewish people. At the end of the book, he dies. He doesn't make it into Israel.
So how old was he when he died?
About 20. Yeah. About 20. In fact, we're told it's that Moses, the Torah itself says that Moses died on his birthday. A complete 120. We find that very often with the great Jewish leaders is that they have an idea of completion. It's perfection. It's not like, it's not skewed in any way. Why? Because he was allotted, so to speak, he was allotted 120 years and he maximized every one of them. And he didn't die early, prematurely for a reason. It means he didn't do anything that would contribute to his early demise. So the Almighty allotted him 120 years, and that's, he maximized it. And as opposed to, most mere mortals, our sin contributes to our early demise. You find this even today. This is it's remarkable. If you take a look at the great Torah scholars that have lived in the 20th century, 20th and 21st century, people that live today, they all live to 103, 104, 105. It's insane. Like, it's just if you just make a graph of the great Torah scholars, especially the ones living in Israel, They're fully functioning. They're delivering discourses to thousands of people. They're sought for consultation by everyone in the world, and they're 104, 107. Still fully functioning. It's mind-boggling, at a time where most people, they retire. You're 70, almost 73, right? You should live me well, but, you kind of have your, the height of your life experience is kind of behind you, right? That's what we say, you the peak of your life is maybe your 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
That is sad to think that the peak of your
Well, I'm saying your productivity. Well,
once is old. Rahm Emanuel's brother wants us all to die at 75.
Oh,
that's more efficient, right?
That article, yes.
An asshole. Oh,
it's insane,
God.
Crazy stuff.
You've seen him on television. He's obnoxious. He wrote Obamacare.
This was in Atlantic Magazine.
Abraham
Oh my
after
God.
Moses came along.
Abraham was way before Moses.
That's what I thought.
Abraham's before Moses. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's all the book of Genesis.
Right.
Jacob's kids,
My wife started
Jacob's
even-
grandkids is the forebears of Moses. Right? Moses, Amram, Yitzhar, Levi. Moses. Right. So Moshe's great grandfather was the son of Jacob. Hence, his great great grandfather was Jacob. His great 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 grandfather was Isaac, and his great 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 grandfather would be Abraham.
Abraham took a chaotic nation, if you will, if it had gone to call a nation, and welded them together.
Well, Abraham technically didn't actually found a nation. Abraham is he's not called a Jew, he's called a Hebrew or Ivri. The term Ivri also means from the other side. The idea being the term for Hebrew or Ivri is someone who is radically different from the other side, kind of the other side of town or the other side of the river, so to speak. He had a different perspective. Everything means that's what as we mentioned last week. Abraham's hallmark was the idea of thinking creatively and being driven and being motivated. And that's why we say, as descendants of Abraham, we have this characteristic of being driven and of not settling for mediocrity.
Yes, right.
So that's Abraham, but that's not yet a nation. We say that the Exodus and the Mount Sinai experience that formed us to be from a family, from a tribe into a nation. So we have all the instructions of the mitzvot from the Torah. And we have Moses' death at the end of the Torah. Moses, before he dies, we might have mentioned this last week, writes the entire Torah 13 times. He hands one of them to each one of the tribes. And he has another one, 13th one, for safekeeping. That would be, these scrolls would be the scrolls that would be used to copy all subsequent Torahs. Have to be copied from these scrolls and eventually from other scrolls. There's a law that if you want to write a Torah scroll, you cannot write it from memory, you cannot write it from a chumash, you cannot write it from an audio book, you have to write it from an actual extant Torah. So every Torah that we have today was copied from a Torah, that eventually was copied from the Torah scrolls that Moses gave to the Jewish people. Moses dies, they're about to enter, I apologize there. They're about to enter Israel, and Moses dies. Who takes over? Joshua. Joshua is his student, his protege. And we say, that the Talmud says that the face of Moses is like the face of the sun, the face of Joshua is the face of the moon. Right? The sun reflects the moon. You look at the sun, you look at the moon, it kind of looks very similar to the sun in size, which is kind of remarkable, especially when you counter the fact that the moon is 27,000 times smaller than the sun. But for us, it looks the same. They both illuminate, but one of them is a reflection of the other. So yes, Joshua illuminated. Joshua was a leader. Joshua gave direction, gave us guidance, and he was a reflection of his teacher. He studied from his teacher, but he wasn't quite like Moses. Either way, the Jewish people accepted him, and we have multiple times in the Torah where God instructs Moses to take Joshua and prepare him for leadership, to tell the people what you hear from Joshua, it's as if you hear from me. And Moses wanted his kids to be, Moses wanted his own children to be the future leaders. God says, no, your kids will not be the leader. And we know Judaism, and especially the Jewish leaderships, is a meritocracy. Right? We don't, besides when we get to the term of the idea of kings, we'll get to that a little later in the Davidic line, but it's a meritocracy, the spiritual leadership of the Jewish people. So, Moses, yes, you're wonderful, you're the greatest man that ever lived. Your kids are fantastic, but Joshua is the one who's going to be the leader. They enter Israel. Now, what does Israel look like? It's not called Israel, it's called Canaan. And Israel is occupied by 7 tribes. Canaan, Hittite, Amorite, Perizi, Yevushi, Girgashi. I think that was all of them. I don't remember. The Torah tells us to put the names of all 7 tribes. And each of these tribes has different various city-states. The term city-state is an ancient kind of a form of government. We have kind of a city that's kind of autonomous in how it runs. And the Jewish people are about to enter a hotbed of different cultures, different nations, a hotbed of idolatry, and their conquest of Israel will not be super smooth. And in fact, for the next 400 years, the Jewish nation will have to be in constant combat and skirmish and struggle with factions or variants of these 7 nations. Not only that, we're going to meet the group called the Philistines, or the Midian, and the Midianites. These were primarily in the coastal areas, and these were tribes that gave the Jewish people lots and lots and lots of trouble. So they enter Israel. How do they enter Israel? They enter Israel from the east. They cross the Jordan, right? They're on the footsteps of Israel. They're on the doorstep of Israel on the east bank of the Jordan. They cross the Jordan. How do they cross the Jordan? So they put the Ark of the Covenant and into the river, and the river splits. And the Kohanes walk in. It's all described in great detail. They bring in 12 stones, and then after they enter, they erect these monuments where they write the entire Torah in them. They build an altar. They have this incredible kind of like initiation on the Mount Har Gerizim and Har Eval, the Mount of Gerizim and Eval. We have half the nation on one side and half the nation on the other side, and the Ark of the Covenant and the Kohanes in the middle, and they make these declarations: "Blessed is he who upholds the Torah. Blessed is he who doesn't, commit any of the sexual sins. Blessed is he who, etc., etc." 11 blessings, 11 curses. Everyone answers Amen. They're in Israel. They had their initiation. They made their proclamation. They put their stamp on the state of Israel, or on the land of Israel. They built this monument that has the entire Torah in 70 languages. Now they begin 15 years of conquest of Israel.
Quick question: where's all this part documented?
Yes, so that's a good question. So we have the Jewish Bible. We'll get to how the Jewish Bible came into being. We have the Jewish Bible, and the first 5 books are the 5 books of the Torah. And there's a qualitative difference between the Torah and the rest of the books of the Bible. But there's 24 books in total, with the books of the prophets, so like Joshua, the book of Joshua. You've heard
39.
that? No, maybe there'll be 39 books of the Talmud.
No, there's 39.
That was
Of the Tanakh.
that's
No.
what the Christians.
No, the Jewish Bible was called the Old Testament, or
No, I know believe me.
yes, 24 books. 24 books. It's only 24 books.
There are 12 prophets.
I believe there's 11 books of the prophets, and then there would be 8 books of the writings.
Okay.
But there's only 24 books of the Tanakh, that's for sure. One of them is called Trei Asar, right? One of the books is called Trei Asar, which is 12 smaller books, like the book of Amos and Avadia and Yonah.
Yeah, those.
So those are 12 small ones, but that's all condensed into one book called 12.
In the Old Testament, the minor prophets.
Okay, so
Minor prophets, thank you.
I'm not talking about the New Testament.
Yeah, okay, good. So
So where did you read
Sorry
that?
about that.
Where did you get your information that there were 70 languages?
well, the Torah says.
I don't remember ever.
The Torah says that you write the entire Torah be'er
Book
hetev,
of Joshua.
very super clearly. And you look at Rashi brings the Midrash, it says they wrote in 70 languages.
And they also, when they get to in Deuteronomy, when they get to the land, there's a like oasis with there's 12 palm trees and 70.
Yeah, so they have 70 already comes from we already have that from Noah, from this week's Parsha. We talked about the 70 descendants, and they formed the 70 nations. The term 70 is a very, very popular term. Very important number, because it kind of the 70 people came to Egypt, and they correspond to the 70 nations and 70 languages. And Pharaoh spoke all 70 languages, but he didn't speak right besides for one, etc., etc.
70 languages already.
And what's his name? Joseph. He spoke one more.
He spoke one more than Pharaoh, exactly. And he said, "Hush, hush! Don't tell anyone about that." Okay, so where were we? So the Torah. So we have the 5 books of the Torah, And then the book of Joshua is the first book of the Judges. The book of the Torah is written by Moses. The book of Joshua is written by Joshua. We have the book of Samuel. We have the book of Kings. These terms that you heard. Kings. The book of Judges. Very important books. And it kind of goes in chronological order.
Okay.
And then that's basically what we know. Remember, the first, what we would call modern historian, the person who's trying to document and chronicle stories from an unbiased perspective, and we know that no one's really unbiased. This is something we could all agree upon. No one is truly unbiased, but even the idea, the concept of history, the way we view history is try to just give the unbiased picture of what happened. That only begins 2,500 years ago with Herodotus. So we don't really have any other sources, any other documentation aside from the Jewish Bible.
Okay.
But we have a very good tradition. We were always very good at documenting and organizing and writing things down. Okay, now, because you brought up the idea of the Torah and where these things are documented, it's very important to mention that if the Jewish people had not screwed up, this is what the Talmud, statement of the Talmud, had the Jewish people not sinned, all we would have is the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. All the other books were written in response to the needs of the generation. So if you have, let's say, the book of Ezekiel, the book of Isaiah, these are books of prophets castigating the Jewish people. As we know from David Askin's speech that he gave on Yom Kippur, that the role of the prophet is to kind of bring the Jewish people back to where they're supposed to be. And therefore, had the Jews not sinned, we wouldn't have a need for any of the books besides for the 5 books of the Torah, because that is Judaism. Judaism, that's all the laws, all the 613 mitzvahs, the mission, the what it means to be Jewish is in the Torah. The book of Joshua, because it has the description of conquest and divvying up the land, which is important. Because as we're going to mention now, we're going to engage with 15 years of conquering as much as we can of the land of Israel, known as the land of Canaan, and then we're going to spend the time allocating the different parcels of land to the 12 tribes. The Jewish people identified, we mentioned this last week, as with their tribe, with a tribal unit, and the land that every family got a portion of the land based upon their tribe. So, like what we would call the West Bank today is Judea and Samaria. It's called Judea and Samaria because that's what the tribe of Judah and tribe of Shimon was. The Ruvain was on the east bank of Israel. Shimon was, as we mentioned, south. Levi, the tribe of Levi, didn't have one. Judah was also in the south, and a lot of them were up the north and further south and further west, etc.
Why do you think it was called the land of milk and honey? What do you think is meant by that?
Well, it seems like it's just a wonderful land.
Fertile land.
It's fertile. It is prosperous. It is, it's super sweet. It's a super positive for spiritual growth as well. We have there's a great story, great short little episode in the Talmud about one of the scholars who emigrated to Israel, and he prayed to forget all of his Torah. Great Torah scholar comes to Israel and says, I want to forget all my Torah. Why? Because I'm coming to Israel. I'm studying the Torah of Israel, so to speak. And there's a great, there's a tremendously positive impact that the land has on the Torah study. I want to forget. I don't want to be, I want to have unadulterated Israeli Torah, so to speak. So yes, so it means on a physical level to be prosperous, but also on a spiritual level, it's the land most conducive for spirituality.
You know
What's the
what?
origin of that phrase?
It comes from the Torah.
It's in the Bible. It's in the Torah.
To the Torah.
It just, it's almost, to me, it seems like it was, I don't even know how to say, but you're calling it the land of milk and honey, but yet they had to fight tooth and nail to conquer that land.
Yeah, and
It
this
was
is another
not
great. This is
easily-
another great theme. We mentioned this last week, but now we'll see this in earnest as we progress today. When the Jewish people were in the wilderness, 40 years, they have Moses. Okay, they have a direct line to God. Direct line. with the greatest prophet that ever lived. They have their clothing growing with them, their shoes growing with them. They have a climate-controlled atmosphere with these clouds of glory. They have the pillar of fire at night. They have manna falling from heaven. They have a meat descending from the ground. They have water from a rock. It's just an incredible, supernatural kind of way of existence. What were they doing all the time? We're just playing Angry Birds the whole time. They were studying Torah the whole time. It's basically, this is the closest you get to utopia. So you have unbridled spirituality without any need to worry about your physical life. All that comes to an end. That's not what the Almighty wants. The Almighty wants us to struggle. It wants us to have. The Almighty wants us to have to deal with the challenges of being a physical body that has physical needs and that has physical distractions.
The challenge with that is, though, that none of those people that left Egypt stepped foot into.
Well, none of the people that were over the age of 20, more precisely. Well, none of the adults that left Egypt.
None of the adults that
Yes.
left Egypt made it there. So that whole band of wisdom.
Yes,
didn't
but remember, it was
That
dynamic. It was
flawed.
ongoing. It wasn't just the people the adults that left Egypt. There was their kids. There was their children. They were. It was an entire generation, even more than a generation and a half of
the
people.
other people were prison mentality.
Oh, absolutely.
Did not the women go?
Yeah, the women did as well, because the women didn't sin in they didn't sin
golden calf?
with the golden calf, exactly.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think I see a fascinating, looking at milk and honey as a fascinating metaphor for that process of growth, and taking the growth of the nation of Israel and comparing it to just regular human or animal growth to some extent. Like the time they're in the desert, they're being protected, they're being completely provided for, they're being cared for, similar to a baby in the womb. You have a direct connection to God. There's this umbilical cord concept of nourishment and sustenance and sustainment, and then they are going to have to be birthed into this. And birth is this it's a huge change.
Trauma.
It's very shocking. It's traumatic, but it's the beginning of something new. And so they've got this womb-like experience through the desert, and then they're birthed. They cross this water into the new land, and they're birthed through this time of trauma and transition, and they go into a land of milk and honey. And milk is such a symbol of nourishment and of life. And there's still a level, it's not the level of care and nourishment you get in the womb, but you're still being cared for in a way that you will not be cared for once you've grown. And so you've got this milk and this baby nourishment and this growth through the child part of life. And then they continue to face challenges, they continue to grow, and then by the time you're an adult, you realize the sweetness of conquering and the sweetness of learning, and that even though the challenges are no fun, nothing worth having comes without work. And so you can appreciate that honey. And so I think there's a fascinating metaphor being presented there. And then if you scale it back and you take it out of the conceptual part and you look at it just from a more physical and agricultural standpoint, you don't have milk and honey without greenness and fertility. And these are people who've spent 40 years in a desert. And just like a woman or an animal really won't lactate without proper nourishment and rest and care, that land had those things. It's a symbol that eventually, once you fight through this, you will get to a place, unlike where you've been before, that will have bees for honey. You're not going to have honey without plants. You look at what's happening to bees now. There's an entire pleasant environment that has to be in place to have that fertilization and that agriculture and that whole world. So I think that's and
but it's interesting because that example of childbirth is actually the Torah. Moses says that. Moses tells the people, I'm carrying you like a mother. Exactly.
And birthing you into
and that's not sustainable, and that's not what the Almighty wants. The Almighty wants us to engage in the struggle. So now you're in Israel. Right? You prepared. This is this is what you came for. Everything else was an exhibition. This is real life.
What got me is Joshua. He goes into these towns and he kills all the cattle, all the horses, of course, all the people. And he's got a smoking ruin. Now, how does this get on?
Okay, so let's talk about the conquest. But first, I want to talk about Moses being the consummate leader, And the importance of leadership and centralized leadership in Judaism can never be underestimated, because we could really mark the progression, the ups and downs of the Jewish people with the status of their leadership. And when the leadership, centralized leadership, gets disbanded in the 2nd century, chaos ensues, basically. Spiritual chaos, yes.
All right, so you say centralized leadership.
That's right.
Okay. Now,
Central authority.
Is this central authority politically derived, spiritually derived?
Usually it's all three of them. It's political, social, but most importantly, it's law. Because we have a very complex way of living as Jews, and if that gets interrupted or that gets lost, or if there's any mistakes, then we're living an inauthentic Judaism. That's very dangerous.
So are we talking about a hierarchy? Because they're...
Okay, so let's see what we're talking about. So when Moses was around, we kind of had the best of all the worlds, because we have Moses. Moses, in the book of Numbers, establishes a group called the Sanhedrin. Right? So everyone heard the term Sanhedrin?
Yes.
Sanhedrin is basically the Supreme Court of the Jewish people, and this is
70 people?
It's 70 people plus Moses, so it's 71. And this group will endure for about 1,500 years. Right? We have records of them all the way to the middle of the 2nd century, when they disbanded. And if you notice that the writing of the Mishnah, we'll get to that hopefully, I don't know, maybe today or maybe not, or some other time. The writing of the Mishnah, which is a dramatic departure from Jewish tradition, because it's writing down the oral Torah. The oral Torah is called oral for a reason, because it's best suited. It was designed to be oral, but it had to be written down by necessity, because the Sanhedrin disbanded. When the Sanhedrin disbanded, you no longer have that safety gap, or the protection, where if you have any doubt, you come to the Sanhedrin. Mm-hmm. Moses, in the book of Numbers 11:16, establishes this group, a group of 71 of the greatest scholars, and they would go on for a long, long time. So that's what you have. You have this. You're going to have this group, and their role is going to be expanded with the end of prophecy at the 2,400 years ago. So about the year 400 of the before the Common Era, we have prophecy being discontinued, and therefore, once prophecy gets discontinued, their role expands. Now. They were part of the leadership, but we also have prophets. And from the time of Joshua till the time of the monarchy of Saul, we have about 400 years. And these 400 years are marked with, like we said, conflict with our neighbors, with these 7 tribes, these city-states, the Philistines. And the leadership is going to be the judges, which are prophets. So the names that we use, familiar names like Gideon, Samson, right? Samson, the great warrior, he was a prophet. He was one of the judges. Samuel, Devorah, everyone's favorite, the feminist's favorite, because one of the leaders was a female. She was a prophet, and she was a judge, and she judged the Jewish people. And
She's a really interesting character.
very interesting character, exactly. And these are the people that are going to be the guidance of the Jewish people. And we have a united Israel. We have a sovereign Israel to a certain extent, right? A plus or minus, right? You're going to have the skirmishes with the neighbors, but for the most part, you're going to have fairly, I guess we could still call it stable but united Judaism. They have their ups and downs, they have their challenges, and the biggest challenge of them all is going to be where you're living amongst so many Gentiles and so many Gentile influences, right? There's always the risk of you becoming like them and losing your distinctness as being the Jewish people with the Jewish way of life, and not being influenced by your neighbors. The Jewish people don't have Jerusalem. They didn't capture Jerusalem for 400 years till David will meet David. David captured Jerusalem. The capital of the Jewish people is in a city called Shiloh. Shiloh is actually not that far from where the Jews live. That's where they kind of established a kind of a mini temple. That's where they brought the tabernacles and the sacrifices, so they had the pilgrimage too, etc. But they don't fully capture all of Israel. All that is going to change when we meet someone by the name of David. But first, the last of the judges is a fellow by the name of Samuel. Samuel is a very remarkable, very pivotal character in Jewish life. He's going to be a prophet who is going to oversee a major transition. So we have this time period of the judges. It has its pluses and minuses. In fact, the last statement, the last verse in Judges is as follows. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his eyes. It was a kind of time where they didn't have monarchy, so they had spiritual leaders, but not political leaders. I guess the prophet was a political leader, but he wasn't the unquestioned authority from the political perspective. And there was a certain degree of chaos as well. Maybe we can say a certain degree of anarchy, where people kind of did whatever they did. There's a lot of bad episodes, like the story of Pilegesh Begiva. This Google it. It's really probably one of the worst episodes in Jewish life. And I felt. I know, Pilegesh Begiva.
You'll never remember how to spell it.
Yeah,
Yep.
go
Come on now.
How do you even spell it?
Pilegesh Begiva. Well, I'll tell you guys a story. So there was this guy who was married to a few women, and one of them was raped, and then she was left out to die, and then she died, and it was outrage, and they took her and they cut her body up into 12 different parts. They mailed it to all the tribes. They caused they caused basically an outrage, and there was a civil war. And they slaughtered almost the entire tribe of Benjamin, because they were the ones who were responsible for it. Yeah. They left only 400 people because they didn't want to decimate the entire tribe. Pretty bad episode. So yes, there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. What? I'm sorry?
They didn't leave no women?
I don't remember all the details. They didn't leave all the women. Yes, they left 400 men. That's pretty bad episode. And yes, kind of civil war is really bad. So what do we have? We have the establishment of the monarchy. Now, remember, we have the Sanhedrin. Their role is not as big as it's going to be, but we do have prophets. And the cool thing about having a prophet is that you kind of went in for any life question. So every person, every individual at some point in their life says, well, what should I go? What should I get? Should I become an accountant or a lawyer or an engineer or something like that? Or what do I do with my life? It's a question everyone has to face today, but even then. And today, you kind of have to figure it out on your own. Back in the day, you went to the prophet. Right? You lost your iPhone. What do you do? You go to the prophet. The prophet. That's the definition of the prophet. It's a great asset for the community. You have a prophet, and this is remarkable because if there's any doubt in Jewish law, there's any discrepancy, there's any problem, there's any disagreement amongst different authorities as to the exact application of Jewish law, you go to the prophet.
So are you saying then that the monarchy was composed of prophets?
No, let's get to the monarchy.
All right.
Prophets, would it be right to say that they were kind of warlords as well?
No, absolutely not. As I say, so we'll get to the
they didn't wield military power.
No. Maybe, yeah, I'm saying to varying degrees. Yes, I'm saying like Joshua was the military leader as well. But I guess we could say they had some sort. They were the leaders, but they were kind of leaders from the spiritual perspective only. And that oftentimes will lend to be military leaders as well. So yes.
Well, and I mean, at that point in time, if Israel was functioning in an ideal fashion, there would not have been much difference between what Israel was doing spiritually and what they were doing politically. And
yeah, because they were under.
Theoretically, that should all go together because Torah has rules for all of that.
That's right.
So, I mean.
That's right, and we know that the Sanhedrin has to be consulted before you engage in any war. So, the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, has to be consulted before you engage in any war. Obviously, you would have to have the prophet sign off on that as well. So, there was a fellow by the name of Saul. Right, Saul was the first king of Israel, the united Israel. Saul was a scholar of scholars. Saul was a warrior of warriors. Saul towered above all men. Saul was what you would say is like the perfect specimen to be a king. And he, actually, a funny story, he was looking for his donkey. So when you don't have your iPhone, you go to the prophet. When you don't have your donkey, you go to the prophet as well. So you went to the prophet Samuel, and he says to him, Samuel, I'm looking for my donkey. He says, oh, your donkey's right over here. And by the way, you're the king of Israel. And the Torah already gives us guidelines for what it means to be a king, what there's special rules for a king. There's 3 mitzvahs in the Torah that only a king that apply only to a king. What are those 3 mitzvahs? Number 1, a king may not have too many horses, because the horses came from Egypt, and the king may want to get more horses and bring the Jewish people back to Egypt. The Jews are not allowed to go back to Egypt. Number 2, the king shouldn't have too much money, right? Because the king has to be a spiritual guide. He has to be the heart of the people, heart of the nation. And if he's too focused on his money and the materialism, he'll shy away from his real responsibilities. And lastly, a king may not have too many wives. Why? Because the wives would influence or could potentially influence him to deviate away from the true path. These are the 3 mitzvahs given only to kings. We'll see a little bit later on when we meet the 3rd king of Israel by the name of Solomon. He's going to have 1,000 wives, more precisely 700 wives and 300 concubines.
It's considered not too many.
So yes,
No, it
and
was too many.
yes,
It
and
caused a problem.
it caused a problem. But
1,000 mothers.
Can you imagine one man with 1,000 women?
yeah, it's crazy.
I have a question. So when
Beyond
did
compromise.
having one wife, I thought that was something in the Torah, but obviously not.
No, polygamy in Judaism was only is fairly recent, about 1,000 years old, where it was prohibited. So yes, it's considered an edict. But by strict Torah law, a man can have as many wives as he wants, provided that they're all on board and that he can provide for all of them emotionally, physically, etc. Theoretically, if it were to be possible.
The Mormon thing was a political thing, why they stopped polygamy. In order to become a state,
Utah, exactly. I know for Utah to be admitted into the Union, one of the very strict anti-polygamy laws. That's right.
I've been
Yes.
to one of those towns. I've been to Colorado City, Arizona, where they have 55,000 polygamists.
Yes, so it's very, very interesting, actually, what happened with a fellow by the name of Rabbeinu Gershom. He was one of the earliest of the Rishonim, and he had more than one wife, and one of them tried to kill him. It was a whole disaster of a story, and he said this is just it's too much for people today, and people of today's stature are not capable of managing all this, and therefore he said no longer, and hasn't been an issue for more than 1,000 years. Women cannot have more than one husband. Only men can have more than one wife, and the reason behind that is very simple, because if a woman has more than one husband, we don't know who the father is. So you have, if you have multiple husbands, you have progeny. You don't know who the father is. Supposed to, if a man has multiple wives, we could still know who the father is.
Mama's baby, daddy's baby.
So let me just ask a more general question. So who has the authority to change the Torah and what it says?
Yes. So
God, I mean.
yes. So that's a great question. The answer to that is that the Torah itself gives, quote unquote, the rabbis very broad authority to make sweeping changes. More specifically, it's given to the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin, they have incredible power. The Torah says it's in I have the exact pasuk, the exact verse. But it says, when there's any doubt, bein dam ledam, between blood and blood, bein din ledin, you go to the Sanhedrin and they can say that. So
there's a difference between interpretation of ambiguity.
That's right. That's right. That's
Exactly.
a total change.
Because the Torah doesn't say you must have more than one wife. Like, I think if the Torah,
it's not a mitzvah. They're not abolishing a mitzvah. Exactly.
Then they're not going to change that. But if it's not been addressed and happens to have been a cultural practice, then there's more room to change it.
Well,
yes, no?
yes and no. Well, we have rabbinic law. With rabbinic law, we have 2 kinds of rabbinic law. There's rabbinic mitzvahs. There's only 7 of those. Very, very narrow, like lighting candles on Shabbat, lighting candles for Hanukkah. There's only seven mitzvahs that can get you the list if you want afterwards. Only 7 mitzvahs that originate from the rabbis, as they're granted the authority to do so by Torah. But what we have when we talk about rabbinic law, primarily we mean what's called rabbinic fences, term fences.
That's where the fence around the Torah comes
Exactly. The Torah itself says, provide a fence around the Torah, which is the example that I always give is when you have a kid who's taking a bobby pin and sticking it into the outlet, you put a cover on the outlet, right? Because you don't want him to, right? Why are you putting the cover on the outlet? Because it's a protection. It's a fence, protection that he doesn't electrocute himself. Similarly, the rabbis say, hey, the Torah says don't write on Shabbat. Well, don't handle a pen either. Right? It's kind of take a step back away from the actual sin and just provide another layer of protection to that you shouldn't be any confusion whatsoever.
They actually cannot change any laws, right? They could just.
Well, and they cannot abolish any laws, of course. That's another thing. We have, let's say, in the 17th century, a fellow by the name of Shabtai Tzvi, he was a false messiah. One of the things that he did was he tried to permit laws, and the Torah itself says multiple times you cannot add or subtract any laws. Right?
Not supposed to change a jot or a tittle.
Yeah, you can't change anything. It says, to my count, at least 3 times. It says can't add up or subtract the law, but he was adding and subtracting laws left and right.
So the Sanhedrin.
So the Sanhedrin have the right to make mitzvahs, rabbinic mitzvahs, that are binding to everyone, because they're central, like we mentioned, the term central leadership, binding to everyone, but also to make rabbinic edicts as well, or protections, measures against, to prevent the encroachment on the actual Torah law. So the example that we say is that the law of Muktzah on Shabbos, which is don't handle something that is a tool that can only be used for one purpose, and the purpose of doing your prohibited act on Shabbat. If it's something that has multiple uses, you may handle that on Shabbat. But if there's an item, a vessel, a tool that has only one usage and that is prohibited on Shabbat, you may not handle that. And it's rabbinic law, but it's not its actual mitzvah. Rather, it's a protection to an existing Torah-idic mitzvah.
So if this guy comes along and decides that he's going to make changes, but he ends up getting other people who will go along with him, so that means that there has to be some other authority that will...
So this brings us back to the Rabbeinu Gershom. The Sanhedrin, they alone have that authority to make rabbinic edicts and to make rabbinic laws. The fellow who banned polygamy, he was not. Remember, the Sanhedrin had already been disbanded for hundreds of years before that. So that's why, technically, it doesn't really have... he was a leader of Ashkenazi Jewry, and as recently as this century, we have Sephardic Jews that still engage in polygamy because he was like a leader of the Ashkenazi community, and therefore his word carried a lot of weight in the Ashkenazi community, and therefore the practice or the adoption of this restriction was in the Ashkenazi community completely accepted. A few other things that he did, he also made that divorce can only happen if there's mutual consent. From a Torah perspective, the man is the one who's responsible to decide whether or not it's the time he has a responsibility of making the determination as to the viability of a marriage. So I guess from strict Torah law, a man can say, I'm giving a divorce, and just give the woman the divorce, and she's divorced. As opposed to post-Rabbeinu Gershom, so the past 1,000 years, that is no longer true. There has to be mutual consent. And the last law that he did, Rabbeinu Gershom. Gershom. Very, very impactful, influential, about the year 1000, so about 1,000 years ago. And the last thing that he did was that you're not allowed to open up other people's mail. Interesting. So it doesn't really... Two marriage-related, one about polygamy. Means he understood that men already at his time don't have the capacity to have multiple wives and still do it the way they're supposed to do it, and they don't have the same capacity that Torah grants them or the responsibility to kind of be the one who's going to determine the viability of the marriage. It has to be a mutual consent.
You're saying in the Sephardic community, in some places today?
Well,
polygamy?
I don't know about today anymore, but for sure in the 19th century, yes.
In the kibbutz, they had them. They would bring them over, and the guy would come over with his wives. So they'd say, "Well, we got to go out there and dig up the garden out there." So he'd send his wives out. So the kibbutz said,
it's not a good thing. Yes, maybe.
modern history is quite an outlier.
Yes. So, but even 1,000 years ago, it became clear that it's not really the best. And David. Look at David. David had 6 wives. He was able to juggle them.
Is that just so they produce more offspring, or?
Well, it's an interesting thing. So you have a king, and the king has to build alliances. Yeah. So it's kind of like a political ploy as well. You build alliances by intermarrying with royalty. It was a very common ancient method of alliance building. Yeah. And Solomon, like we said, he had 700 wives. He was a very busy guy, but also And he claimed that he had the capacity to do it, but we see that his wives led him astray. The Torah even spells it out. The Bible spells it out clearly, Book of Kings, that says that yes, he thought he had the capacity to handle them, and they wouldn't influence them, but they ultimately did.
Well, he had to satisfy these wives, Solomon did, because of their pagan ancestry when he made a deal with the other king over there about marriage.
Yeah, so they might have converted, but maybe might have not been a sincere conversion, etc.
He was given acquiescence to their practices. Watch and observe.
And it was his downfall.
This ugly-looking guy or something.
Yeah, but I'm saying his downfall wasn't quite as dramatic as, let's say, the downfall of Saul. So let's talk about Saul. So Saul's the first king of Israel. Saul is what you would say is the model king, and his reign lasts for a grand total of 2 years. That's it. Now, what happens? How are ancient kings anointed? Everyone here heard the term Mashiach. Saul is called Mashiach. David is called Mashiach. Kings are called Mashiach because the term Mashiach means anointed one. The way they used to inaugurate a king, they would take oil, special oil, and pour it over his head. And that the word for anointed one is Mashuach or Mashiach in Hebrew. That's why later on, when the whole Christian thing came about, the idea of Mashiach doesn't necessarily mean savior or anything like that. It means king. Or Christos is the Greek word for anointed one. So it's important to know where the term Christ or Mashiach comes from. It comes from the already in the Torah, in the Bible, we talk about Mashiach as well. Okay, so Saul was what you would call the model king, and we find this again and again in Jewish life, that what you perhaps would think is kind of the best leader, the model leader, the guy who's polished and charismatic and talented and capable and brilliant and imposing stature, is someone who's actually kingdom is kind of a tragedy, And David, who was an afterthought in his family, his own family, said, "David, who is David?" David was laughed at. His kids, they would take him and do like this to him with his red hair. That's what they would do to him, his brothers and his family, and he's considered the ultimate king. The quintessential king of Israel is David. So you see this again and again, that we mentioned this right last time. The leadership isn't exactly cookie cutter.
Who anoints Saul?
The prophet Samuel. Prophet Samuel anoints Saul. Saul becomes the king. Saul makes a critical error. Why? What was his critical error? He is instructed by Prophet Samuel to kill the nation of Amalek. Amalek is a nation that was tried reading the Torah to destroy. Amalek is the anti-Jew. It's what we would call today Hitler. It's the idea of just pure, unadulterated evil. And they were a tribe then, and Saul is instructed by Samuel, by the Almighty, go destroy Amalek, kill them, kill Agag, don't leave any remnant of them. Men, women, children, livestock, everything. Destroy them all. And he makes 2 mistakes. Number one, he leaves the king alive, Agag, and he leaves the livestock alive as well. And his rationale is pretty simple. Why do we need to kill the livestock? But you got instruction by the prophet, don't overthink it. If the prophet tells you to do something, you do it.
Doesn't he also allow conjugal visits? Is that the king that did that?
Allows conjugal visits?
When he goes in and captures them instead of killing them?
I don't remember that. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Now, Agag would later go, he would reproduce, and his descendant is Haman, the foe of the arch foe of the Jewish people. I would bet everything that I have that Hitler too is a descendant of. It's pure evil. It's what it is. So you say, how do you kill babies? Well, the Torah tells us to kill babies. How do you understand it? We don't understand it, but we have a living image. If you were able to dial it back to 1892, and you have a little baby Hitler, and what we know today, I think rational, reasonable, good people would say that the right thing to do is to euthanize the baby, right? But it's just a baby. Well, it's Hitler, and it's evil, and it's Amalek is the same thing.
But you only know that through the benefit of perspective.
That's true. But the Torah has a much broader perspective than we have, and the Torah tells us destroy Amalek. Don't leave any remnant of them around, because if you leave any remnant of them around, they'll come back and they'll bite you.
So what was the process by which you were supposed to kill them
War.
and children?
War. Ancient warfare. And typically the Jews, as we were told in the Torah, we talked about this once over there, in warfare, when we have a goal in warfare, we don't believe in just rape, pillage, and murder. We don't believe that. We try to approach our objectives and accomplish our objectives peacefully. If people surrender, we don't just have a senseless slaughter. But there are exceptions. In the example of Amalek, this is an exception. Now remember, for us, we have instruction in the Torah. Not everything in the Torah do we understand. We have the humility to say, the Torah is instructing us to kill little babies. We could say we don't understand it. Mm-hmm. We perhaps understand it intellectually, maybe, philosophically, maybe, emotionally, probably not. But we understand, and we could say, listen, this is a Torah instruction. We don't necessarily fully understand it, and that's fine. That's fine. You just say that. There's nothing wrong with that. Saul had made this mistake. What happens with the mistake? Samuel goes over to him and tells him, you are no longer the king. Now, even though he was still operating as the king, even though the entire nation viewed him as the king, even though he was still ruling, but in a spiritual sense, the idea of being the Jewish king had passed on from him to the next great leader, which is David. What happens with the story of David? So Samuel is told by the Almighty that this fellow by the name of Jesse, Yishai, has one of his...
So Saul loses it because he doesn't follow the instructions.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. One of the 7 sons of Yishai is going to be the next king. So he goes over to the family of Yishai and he says, this one, the most handsome one, the oldest one, the great scholar, wrong guy. That's the next one, wrong guy. One after another, he says, none of them are the king. And then says, Samuel goes to the family of Yishai. He says, is there anyone else? Do you have any other sons? He says, oh yeah, there's one by the name of David, but he's a Nebuch. He's not saying Yiddish. He's a loser. He's in the back with the sheep. So he goes back and he sees this flaming red hair. And flaming red hair, we know in Judaism we don't have a very good history with red hair. We have Esau, who is famously a redhead. The idea of red is that of blood, murder. And he's initially very hesitant, and then he sees his eyes, and the eyes, we know the eyes of Israel is the Sanhedrin, it's the guiding light, and Samuel understands that yes, David is a murderer, but he is a murderer who is going to murder as per the instruction of the Sanhedrin. He takes the oil, he pours it over David's head, and from then on, in a spiritual sense, David is the king. However, Saul is still operating as the king. And eventually, Saul realizes that David wants his kingdom. And what begins is kind of a mini civil war between David and Saul. What happens? There's this great mighty warrior, Goliath, 7'7", monster who was just destroying the Jewish people. It was a Philistine. The Jews always had problems with the Philistines. And David comes, little 5'6", redhead, and takes the little slingshot and kills him. And Saul is impressed, but he's not, he's unfazed. And then he tells David, he says, David, listen, I want to give you my daughter Michal as a wife. But first, there's a condition. I want you to get me 100 foreskins of dead Philistines that you killed. Right? give me 100 foreskins, right? And with the intention.
Saul know that David was anointed?
Well, he knew it, and he suspected it, and he was worried about it. So he came up with these creative methods trying to get David killed. Once David is out, then he knows that his kingdom is unchallenged. He sends David on this mission. David comes back with not 100, but 200 foreskins of dead Philistines. And from then on, David was really technically married to Michal. Saul didn't give Michal his daughter to him, so she married someone else. But they didn't actually consummate their marriage because they knew that Michal was really was legitimately married to David. Saul goes on this headhunting mission. He's like a man driven, obsessed with trying to kill David. He chases him. David's in the tent. David's in the cave. With famous story, David in the cave where Saul and his army and they're looking. Saul and Avner. They're looking for David. David hides in the cave. Saul has to go use the restroom. He goes to the cave. David cuts out a piece of his garment without Saul realizing, and then he goes out and says, "Look, I could have killed you, but I didn't." David gets stuck between the legs of Avner, and he's almost killed, but then this mosquito comes and bites Avner, and he unshuffles his legs, and he goes out. All these great stories that we read about in the book of Samuel, the book of Kings. Primarily the book of Samuel. David has his allies. Foremost among them is the son of Saul, Jonathan. Eventually, Saul is cornered in battle by the Philistines. Saul commits suicide. Really a tragic end to what could have been a great story. Saul commits suicide, and then David assumes the leadership unrivaled.
Jonathan was also killed.
I'm sorry?
Jonathan was also killed.
Who?
Jonathan?
I don't remember. Is Jonathan also killed as well?
Yeah, the same battle, I think. That's why I think Saul committed suicide.
Yes. He was surrounded. There's a whole debate. We know that in Judaism you're not allowed to commit suicide. Maimonides writes that someone who commits suicide is a murderer, and it's judged like a murderer, and God treats him like a murderer. Suicide is a big time no-no. So there's a whole question as to the legitimacy of Saul's actions and what gave him the right to do it. And according to some, it's because he was cornered and he was going to die anyhow, and therefore it's preferable to die and not to be tortured first. Others say it's because he knew that the morale of the Jewish people would be broken if they saw their king who was beheaded and just paraded through. Either way, he committed suicide, and David assumed the leadership. And this begins probably the best stint or the best era of Jewish life, kind of Jewish life in its best for the next 80 years, 40 under the leadership of David, and 40 under the leadership of his son, Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech.
What happened to the Philistines? Are there any left?
Nah. It's interesting because the term Palestine was revived by the Romans, right? The ancient Philistines of the coastal group, seafaring group, are gone.
Phoenicians.
And I'm sorry?
I was going to say I had read that was currently Gaza, that area.
Yes, coastal areas. The Romans, when they overran Israel, they destroyed the temple, and they stamped out the Great Revolt in the middle of the 1st century. They kicked all the Jews out of Israel, and they renamed it Palestine. So they revived that ancient name, and today we know the Palestinians are really Jordanians. They're not the same people as the Plishtim that we talk about in the Bible, but that was kind of the name that the British also, when the British had the British Mandate over Palestine, they renamed it Palestine as well, in homage to the ancient Philistines. So David becomes the king. And David is going to be, like we said, the consummate king. He's going to be someone who is going to be the one to capture Jerusalem. So he's the one who is going to finally end the mission that began with Joshua of capturing Israel. He buys Jerusalem. He isn't able to build a temple, but he still captures Jerusalem. Solomon would go on to build a temple. He has a life of tremendous challenge. He has his kids who one of his kids tries to kill him, Avshalom. He has chaotic. He has a son who has a son who's trying to overthrow him. Imagine you're the king and your son is trying to create a coup to overthrow you.
He has tremendous parenting, a lack of parenting skill.
Maybe. Why would you say that?
No, because his
The
son
trouble
tried to
with
kill
those
him.
kids, I mean, my God, one of them was a rapist, and still he does nothing.
Who's the rapist?
It's not Absalom, it's the other one.
He's a whole bunch of kids. He has the episode with David and Bathsheba, which is very important to not read it in the simplistic way. In fact, the Torah, the Talmud says that anyone who said that David sinned is not anything other than mistaken. How so? Let me explain. Because everyone's familiar with the basic broad strokes of the story. The story is that he sees this lady and she's bathing and he covets her and he chases her and he finds out that her husband is exactly Uriah Hitti, and he sends him to the front lines and he dies and he marries her. That's the basic broad strokes of the story. What's important to note is that first, David for sure did not commit any prohibited act of any sort. How so? Well, she who says she was married. We know that David, all his soldiers that went out to battle gave letters of divorce to their wives in case there was any doubt as to what happened to them in battle. They didn't come back. Additionally,
Nathan comes to David and says that he's
yes.
sinned.
Okay.
And they lose that child.
But remember, remember, David's sin on David's level, perhaps for us would be a mitzvah. This is an important distinction. For us, the greatest people, this is a concept we see all over Jewish philosophy. For the great people, they're judged on a much higher level, so to speak, a much more, they have a much stricter enforcement of the law. So when Moses hits the rock, right, he causes a great,
punishment for a small act.
Exactly.
Right.
And in fact, what does God say to him?
That he's not going to get the promised land.
What does God tell him before that?
He should just say
as
to
a
the
result
rock.
of what? As a result, because you don't
believe. Credit for bringing forth the water.
No, that's not what happens.
Disobedience and lack of faith.
Exactly. God tells him you don't have faith. Can you imagine telling Moses doesn't have faith?
Yeah.
But you
because Moses on his level is judged on a much. Imagine the miracle that you do in front of everyone. Everyone's all thirsty. Yeah. You hit a rock and there's water for everyone. Yeah. Is that a miracle? Is that sanctification of God's name? Absolutely. Yeah. For Moses, it's considered a sin of what degree? A sin of rejection of God. Right. Because Moses on his level is he's treated much more stringently.
But he knew God face to face.
He was supposed to talk to the rock.
Yes.
The lack of faith is a greater betrayal because of the relationship they had.
And the status.
I'm fine with that. What I'm not following is if it's recorded in the Torah that God's prophet comes to David and says, "You sinned and you will suffer for this." How are you going to turn around and say it wasn't a sin? Because God's prophet went to him and said, "You sinned."
I agree it was a sin, but it was a sin for David.
Well, yeah,
on a technical level, this is what the Talmud says. You guys are arguing against me. This is what the Talmud says. The Talmud says that if you read it crudely, you'll mistakenly think that David committed a very crude sin.
Was Nathan a prophet or
Yes,
not?
of course Nathan the prophet came to him.
Walk with me. Nathan is a prophet. Yes, we agree. Okay? Yeah. He's a prophet who hears from God and is correct.
Absolutely.
Does he go to David?
Yes.
And he says David sinned.
That's right.
And they lose the child because of it as well.
Right. So there's no question that he sinned. So the Talmud is arguing how.
But remember
the
what the Talmud is telling us.
Is it a debate over the level of the sin?
Exactly.
And does that even matter?
It does matter. It matters for us because when we read the Torah and we read the Bible, we have a tendency of bringing it down to our level. So we imagine what someone that we are contemporary of ours or ourselves, and we read it in our terms. It's important not to read it in our terms. Yeah. David himself was a prophet. A prophet is a level of scholarship and piety that we can never sniff. So we're talking about a much greater person than us doing a sin that probably most of us wouldn't do. That's my only point is that it's very important not to read it on our level, and it's important. Yes, for David's level was a sin.
Yeah.
But not a crude sin the way you would seem to read it on a simplistic level. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And on a technical level, it wasn't a sin at all. because she wasn't married, she was divorced.
But the murder
Uriah Hittite
the murder was the sin.
Well, he wasn't murdered. He was sent to the front lines and he died in battle.
on.
But he did it. But he
David
did
is
it
the
knowing
one who
he would
puts
die.
him
Like he did that on purpose.
Purposely.
It was intentional.
But
It
remember,
was intentional, exactly.
No,
Yeah.
not
It was
really.
no
Not
mistake.
everybody who's in the front line dies.
No, but that's what it
That's
says.
true.
Just
No,
you
no,
have
no,
a
no,
higher
no,
chance.
no,
I'm
no.
gonna
But the
put you
Torah
here and your odds
says
are gonna be
specifically
I don't
that
know, out
that's
of
was
those 20
his
million
reasoning.
Russians died.
And he does that so that
Like
he
it
can
says
marry
that.
Bathsheba because
I
already
Right,
agree
because he
that
wants to
that would
correct
be
it.
the simplistic reading. The Talmud is coming to tell us, it's coming to instruct us to not read it simplistically. That's my only point. Of course, if you read another example, right? Reuven and Bilhah. Remember that story?
Yes.
Reuven and Bilhah?
Yes.
It's a story. Rachel dies, and Reuven, the
Takes
son of
his
Jacob,
wife, yeah.
goes and sleeps with Bilhah. That's what the
Yeah.
Torah writes about him.
Yeah.
And the Talmud also says everyone who said that Reuven sinned is nothing but mistaken. The same exact words. Kol ha'omer Reuven chata, eino ela toeh. Kol ha'omer David chata, eino ela toeh. Same words they use. I think it's the same Talmudic piece that talks about that. Whoever said that David sinned is nothing but mistaken. Whoever said that Reuven sinned is nothing but mistaken. How so? What actually happened was that Jacob had 4 wives. The primary wife was Rachel, and therefore his permanent domain, his permanent residence, kind of speak, his bed was Rachel's tent. Rachel dies. Jacob decides to move his tent to Bilhah's tent, to move his bed from Rachel's tent to Bilhah's tent, because Bilhah was kind of the maiden of Rachel. And Reuven was upset about that because his mother Leah was a more primary wife, and exactly. So he took Jacob's bed and moved it from Bilhah's room to Leah's room. That's what actually happened. What does the Torah write about them? Reuven slept with Bilhah. That's what it writes. And what's the very next verse? And the sons of Jacob were 12. The Torah is hinting to us, even though I just told you a second ago Reuven slept with Bilhah, still the sons of Jacob were 12. Why? He is still equal to all the sons of Jacob. It was 12, right? It wasn't like there was 11 and one of them was a sinner. The Torah is hinting to you, don't read it literally. Why? Reuven was a great man, and therefore Reuven intervened in any way in the sleeping patterns of his dad. For him, on his level, it will be equivalent for us as sleeping with his father's wife. That's the model, right? For us, for the great people, their sins are magnified. They're treated the way the Talmud says, kechut hasayra, like the breadth of a hair, right? If there's any slight variation from total dedication, total scholarship, total piety, total perfection of character, it's blown up to astronomical proportions. Moses does perhaps one of the greatest miracles of all. The entire nation is thirsty. He hits the rock, and there's water for everyone. What does the Torah say about him? Moses has no faith in God. Moses defiled and desecrated God's name in public. Why? Because for Moses, on his level, a slight sin for us on our levels, we see nothing. We see it's perhaps maybe the greatest miracle, but on his level, because there was a slight variation, it's blown up. And for Moses, this is not belief. This is not faith.
Well, I can see it all now.
And that's the model that we use for David as well.
Well, here's all these people starving to death. I mean, they need water and all that. And Moses comes along and says, look, with this rock here, I'm going to get you water. Come on, Moses, what are you talking about? I mean, I can see it right now in there, dissension and you disconnecting and all that sort of thing. So he said, yeah, right to this rock right here. And he hits it.
I thought he says, must I, doesn't he say, must I get it for you?
Yes, he does.
Now remember, this is not the first time Moses was instructed to hit the rock. He was instructed earlier to hit the rock. God tells him to speak to the rock. He speaks to the rock. He ends up being the wrong rock. And Moses assumes that he wasn't really supposed to speak to it. He ends up hitting the wrong rock, and he makes it trickle, and then he hits it again, and then it just starts flowing. Remember, this is all documented in the Torah. This is a document that was given to the people that experienced the actual miracle. It's a historical fact that is incontrovertible by any measure of verification of historical events. Pretty remarkable, but for Moses, it's a sin.
For every action, there's a reaction, right? Because with Bilhah and
And Reuven, yeah.
he lost his
That's right.
His,
That's right. That's right. For Reuben, it's a sin, and he loses his kingdom, his kingship, and he loses his priesthood. He was the oldest. He was the firstborn. He should have been the king. He should have been the priest. He loses them both. Kingdom, he loses to Judah. Priesthood, he loses to Levi.
And in the blessings, it says he's unstable as water.
Exactly. Pachas kamayim, right? You're hasty like water. Okay.
Can I ask you one
Yes.
quickly?
Sure,
Back to
absolutely.
David with Psalm 51, the famous psalm where he, asked God to create in him a clean heart and restore his spirit within him and not to let it depart. It seems to me that whole psalm is teshuvah, that he wants to be back.
Yeah, well, David, his entire life, he was struggling with this. Yes. And what's interesting about that is that Reuven as well, if you remember the episode of Reuven and Joseph. So Joseph, the brothers decide they want to kill him. Reuven says, you know what, let's put him in a holding cell. And then Judah says, let's sell him to the Midianites, right? And to the travelers, to the Ishmaelites, right? That's the story. And the Talmud says, where was Reuven at when the time they sold him? So Talmud says that Reuven was atoning for his sin. So yes, they're great leaders. They understand that any minor infraction is something you have to repent for. For us, we do major infractions. We say, God, me and God were tight. We're the exact opposite, right? Even our major infractions, we say, no big deal. For the great leaders like Moses as well, Moses prayed incessantly, try to have it absolved, and try to get in the land of Israel. He was constantly atoning for that. We're trying to Reuben and also David as well. Yes, David as well. Even though on a technical level he did no sin, and on his, why is that so funny, Bernie? You laugh. No, and then we no.
Carries that.
Yes, as does David.
He just found out the press back then. Maybe.
That's right, but he was. He was.
Sounds like
he was.
God told me because you did not credit me, providing the water. That's one of the reasons why he did.
That's right. That is the reason. That's what it says. He hasn't got. And yes, but he's constantly trying to atone for that. David as well. Yes, like you mentioned, the Psalms.
Because he was in what do you call I forgot the term, but he was he didn't eat or eating.
Fasted.
He fasted for the time the baby was sick until the baby died. He got up and cleaned himself.
Yes. But eventually, David would marry Bathsheba, and their son would be Solomon. And even though we look, as we mentioned this last week, we look at this being somewhat of a scandal, Solomon and the building of the temple, and a very important person in Jewish history is the son of David and Bathsheba, and he assumes the leadership, the kingdom. After David dies at the age of 70. His son Solomon is a grand total of 12 years old, and he becomes the king. And what's interesting about these 80 years of David and Solomon's reign is that these were the high point of Jewish life and Jewish history. They had full sovereignty. They had great kings. They had a united nation. And the Talmud even mentions that they didn't accept any converts during the times of David and Solomon. Interesting. Why? Because there was the fear of insincere conversion. You see the Jewish people, they have it all. They have a united nation. They have tremendously gifted, skilled leaders. They have prosperity. They have a land. They have everything going for them. So who wouldn't want to join that?
Yeah, so they had a tough immigration law, probably built a fence a long time.
Yeah. First the fence, and then we'll talk about amnesty, right? Now, so that's really wonderful, right? David conquers Jerusalem. He purchases Temple Mount. He dies, and Solomon goes on the project of building building the temple that would last for more than 400 years. This is literally the high point in Jewish life. He builds the temple. It becomes the center of Jewish focus, of Jewish. They have the pilgrimage multiple times a year, and is a tremendous influence on the Jewish life from then till its destruction by the Babylonians 400 some odd years later. Solomon contributes to the Bible. We have the book of Koheles, Ecclesiastes that we read a week and a half ago. We have the book of Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. We have multiple books written by Solomon. Solomon, the wisest of all men. We have the famous Solomon episode with the there's a joke about that.
With the baby.
Yeah, the baby, right? The joke is that the two mothers-in-law. Okay, it's just the opposite. Either way, the woman who says let's cut them, she's the real mother-in-law. That's the joke. Okay, not so funny. And Solomon dies, and his son Rechavam, he takes over, and that's a very short-lived monarchy because that's when we have the split of the tribe of Judah. The nation of Judah, and the nation of Israel. We had about 500 years since Joshua. We've had our ups and downs. We've had all the judges. We had Devorah. We had Samuel. We had Gideon. We had Samson. We had our skirmishes and our battles with these 7 nations. We have the Philistines. Eventually, we have the monarchy of Saul, short-lived and tragic. David. We have the whole stories, all the stories of David, Book of Samuel. Let's read it. Very interesting. We meet Solomon. We have the temple. We're at the zenith of Jewish history. Solomon dies. His son Rechavam takes over. He makes a few critical errors at the beginning of his monarchy, of his leadership. We have growing tension between the different tribes of the north and the tribes of the south. Why? Because you have the kingdom, the capital in Jerusalem. You have the temple in Jerusalem. You have basically the center point of the epicenter of the Jewish life is in Jerusalem. But you have all those tribes up north, and they kind of feel left out. Mm-hmm. And then he makes a few critical mistakes. He raises taxes. We know that makes people revolt more than anything else. So he raises taxes, and also he goes and has his inauguration in the northern kingdom. And he follows the advice of the young people, who are the whippersnappers, and they say, you got to whip them into shape. These are your subjects. You're the king. You got to go show a sign of strength and force. Go establish your kingdom in the north, raise the taxes, beat them down, and eventually they secede. And from then, for the next 250 years, basically, we have 2 Israels. We have splintered Israel. We have the kingdom of Israel in the north, called the kingdom of Israel, and we have the kingdom of Israel in the south, called the kingdom of Judah. And what happens is that you have 2 kingdoms heading in radically different directions. You have in the south the kingdom of Judah with the temple that was forever, for the next, I think they had about 20 or 25 kings from the times of Solomon till the destruction of the first temple. And you have the kingdom of the north that had 19 kings, and they went astray in a major way. Every single one of these 19 kings would be evil in some capacity, would adopt idolatry in some capacity. They built temples for idolatry. There are, like for the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, you know that story. Elijah comes to try to make amends or try to change the trajectory of the people in the north. He has this standoff with the priests of the idolatry, and he makes this major impact. Everyone's all impressed, and then you have this, the queen Jezebel, and she says, "Elijah, I'm going to kill you if you don't get out." And the influence of the impact of his display is mitigated. You have people by the name of Achav. Yeravam was a big character. These were all kings of the northern kingdom of Israel, and the character and the morality and the behavior of the kingdom of Israel descended and deteriorated until they were destroyed. More precisely, they were scattered by the Assyrians. So now, remember, it's one of the important elements of learning Jewish history is the idea of Jewish history not happening in a vacuum. Right? There's always going to be the reflection of the way the Jewish people are living and the internal influences of the Jewish people and challenges as well of the Jewish people. But you have the rest of the greater world out there, and you have the small little country of Israel, much more precisely the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, and they're sandwiched between the Egyptians from the south, the Egyptian empire that ascended in the south, and the Assyrian empire in the north. And in the year, this is, I have the years here, I haven't been doing, the year 796 is when we have, before the Common Era, we have Israel splitting into two kingdoms. In the year 555, we have the Assyrians overrunning the northern kingdom of Israel, and we have the scattering of the 10 tribes, taking them outside of Israel and sending them elsewhere. The Assyrians, they had a very interesting method of conquering. And you conquer a nation, so you could subject them to your rule and to your culture and to your way of life and to paying taxes. But there's always the risk of them regrouping and then rebelling. So what they would do is they would make this little musical chairs and take nations and put them in exile, spread them out. Because when you're out of your scatter them, is that you're out of your land, you're out of your familiar territory, you're new, you don't know the place. Right? You're much more of a docile subject, much less likely to rebel. And therefore, he takes the 10 tribes, 10 northern tribes, and he sends them elsewhere. Now, we know these mythical, legendary 10 tribes. They appear everywhere. They appear in Africa. They appear in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, all these exotic places. Nepal, India. We have groups claiming to be descendants of these 10 tribes. The Bnei Moshe, the Bnei Menashe, all these various people who claim to be, and they have these traditions, and they light candles on Friday night, and they wear these fringes at the edges of their clothing that resemble tzitzis in some capacity. Either way, in the Talmud, there's a debate whether or not these 10 tribes are ever coming back. Whether or not they're coming back is a question of debate. Either way, what actually happened was a great tragedy where we had a united kingdom, we had a united monarchy, we had a singular temple in Jerusalem, and we have to leave. We're done here? Yeah. And also, we'll just quickly finish up here. And so much promise and such tragic consequences where you have a deterioration over a couple hundred years and eventually a scattering of the 10 tribes. Some members of these 10 tribes actually migrated south and joined the kingdom of Judah, but the vast majority of them are lost to history, and we probably will never hear them again. There's a debate whether they'll come back or not.
I have a question before you move on. Where's the Sanhedrin in all of this?
Sanhedrin is always in the temple. So they're always...
Where are they during the course of all of this history?
So they have...
When these kings are clearly idolatrous, why is the Sanhedrin?
The Sanhedrin is part of the south. Sanhedrin is in the temple. Sanhedrin was situated in the temple, and the Sanhedrin was adjudicating the Jewish people. They're the Supreme Court. They give the law.
But it's a different country now, right?
But it's a different country, exactly. It's a different country and different rules. So they, in the north, they established temples for idolatry. And they forbade the members of their constituents from joining the pilgrimage to the temple. So basically, they severed the link between like you said, there was there was boundaries, and they severed the link between the Jewish people in the north from the Jewish center in the south, and that just spiraled out of control, and they're gone.
So those 10 tribes, how populous were they? Was it like 90% of total Jewish population?
I don't know the exact. You would assume it was more.
Yes, you would assume 10 tribes. Was it
I don't know if we know the exact number, but I would assume it was even larger than because the tribes in the south was just Judah and Benjamin.
Half of Benjamin, right?
And then Benjamin kind of just
Why half of Benjamin?
It says half of Benjamin because the other
half
of Benjamin
was where?
stayed with Judah, no?
Stayed with Judah, and the other half went to the 10 tribes.
Is that right?
That's what it says.
Okay, so there you go.
And this is also the period of time where the prophets are talking, right?
Yes. So
the prophets of the Torah, those books are tied into that timeline.
Exactly. So, and the prophets are always trying to influence the leaders of Israel in the north. We have till 12. Okay, well, we're not going to go till 12, but we'll just wrap up a little bit.
The Assyrians, that's that group that, I forget their name now, the ones that ISIS was killing.
The
The
Assyria?
Assyrian, what's left of the Assyrians.
No,
back
they're
to
long
Zoroastrian.
gone. Well, we in ancient
Yeah.
in ancient history, we have these mega empires and very high turnover rate. A couple hundred years here, a couple hundred years there, and you're done. So, like, we have like the Egyptians, and then we have the Assyrians. We want to meet the Babylonians. We want to meet the Persians. We want to meet
Babylon was a province of Assyrians, and then they sort of switched. They took
We're
over
going to
at the
have,
same
like we
time.
said, so we have the Assyrians to the Babylonians to the Persians to the Greeks, and the Greeks split into the Macedonians and the Ptolemaic kingdom, the Assyrian Greek. These are the three offshoots of what was the united Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. We have the Romans, obviously, the Byzantines, etc. So the northern kingdoms, like we say, the great tragedy. They always had these kings that started off as trying to kind of, make amends and trying to reunite the Jewish people, and they had some kings with great potential. In fact, Yeravam ben Nevat, he was one of the famous ones. He was a great scholar and a great leader, and he could have perhaps brought the nation of Israel back to Judaism. He kind of failed miserably. The Midrash tells us, the Talmud tells us this episode of, he was a prophet. So he was, he's an incredible man, incredible potential. And then God tells him, says, listen, just bring the nation of Israel back, right? Repudiate idolatry, come back, reunite the Jewish people, right? Stop leading the Jews of the northern kingdom of Israel astray. And then you and I and the son of Yishai and David will stroll along together in the Garden of Eden. So he says, well, who's first, me or David? He says, David. Us. Says, oh, okay, not interested. He had a few Achilles' heels, and he kind of struck out in his opportunity to reunite the Jewish people. Eventually, they, on a spiritual, we always look at Jewish history with the physical manifestation of spiritual realities. So we have a nation of Israel in the north that is so steeped in idolatry and so far from tradition and strained further and further away that once they reach the point of no return on a spiritual sense, then they're overrun in the physical. The manifestation of that is kind of just filling in the blanks. But it was the writing is ready on the wall from the spiritual sense, and the physical manifestation of that spiritual reality is just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. That was it. But once the spiritual level already descends to a point of no return, it's just a matter of time before that is manifested in the physical reality. So they are overrun, and the nation of Israel is going to be gone for history, and for another 150 years, the nation of Judah is gonna continue. There's going to be efforts, most famously that of Sancheriv, a great Assyrian general who's going to try to take on Jerusalem. He's going to be unsuccessful. And what they tried to do was going to be accomplished by the Babylonians. The Babylonians become the major influence, and they ultimately destroy the temple. They destroy the temple. A few major important items happen. We'll finish with this, with the destruction of the first temple. A few major items happen before the destruction of the temple that are going to be very significant to what's going to happen to the Jewish people afterwards. But what's very important here is that we're going to see a Jewish life with prophets and a temple that over the next couple of hundred years after the destruction of the first temple, or leading up to the destruction of the first temple and going through the exile and the rebuilding of the second temple, there's going to be a few major items that are going to be, there's going to be a major transition. One of the major shifts in Jewish life. You have a temple, you have pilgrimages, you have the temple being the center of Jewish life. You also have prophets. The prophets contribute tremendously to being the leaders of the Jewish people. Over the next couple of years, you're going to have the temple being destroyed. You're going to have the Jewish center of life being sent east to Babylon. You're going to have the rebuilding of the second temple. The second temple paled in comparison to the first temple. Some of the vessels of the first temple are not going to be present, like the Ark of the Covenant. Won't show. We don't have that in the second temple. A lot of miracles that were present in the first temple don't appear in the second temple. There's going to be corruption in the second temple that we didn't have in the first temple. And also, the majority of the Jewish people are not going to be living in Israel, and the Jews will transition from prophecy to becoming what they are today, a non-profit organization. So they got their 501, the 501c3 status is going to happen then. And remember, when you don't have profit,
Lois Lerner didn't do anything.
She lost the emails. Yeah, lost the emails.
She was Jewish, so she.
Is that right?
Yeah, she's Jewish.
Okay, of course. Unsurprisingly, either way, when the nation is going to be facing with these challenges, the very existence of the Jewish people is going to be in flux. So a lot of a major. This is a very pivotal time in Jewish life because you're going to have this major transition of a temple, of the Jewish people with the temple in Israel with prophets transitioning to multiple communities, a community in Israel and a community in Babylon. No temple, or at least not a significant temple, no prophecy, and the role of the Sanhedrin is going to be expanded in a great way. 12 years before the destruction of the first temple, so it happened incrementally, you're going to have a migration, more precisely not migration, but a exile to Babylon. And the Babylonians are going to take the best and the brightest, 10,000 of the best and the brightest, headed by the prophet Ezekiel, and take them and bring them to Babylon. This tremendously weakened the Jewish community in Israel, but the Talmud says this is one of the great miracles in disguise. It was a miracle in disguise to the Jewish people, because imagine you're in Israel, you have the temple. You don't see the writing on the wall. You don't know that within a decade and a half, the temple's been destroyed. Everyone's going to be heading out to Babylon. You don't know that, but the Almighty does know that. And the Almighty prepared the seeds of the community in Babylon by sending a contingent of 10,000 of the best and brightest to Babylon to establish a community that will thrive for 2,500 years. Where this did not happen is in America, for example. In America, we had the Jewish emigration to the United States began in earnest in the 1880s with the Russian and the German emigration to the United States. And they came to America, and what did they find? A land barren of Jewish institutions. There were no yeshivas, there was no kosher facilities, no shuls, no nothing. And what happened? Nothing short of the greatest assimilation in Jewish history. That's what happened. In Babylon, what happened was when the Jewish people, ultimately the temple was destroyed by the likes of Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuzaradan. The English name is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, the Hebrew, and Nebuzaradan. They destroyed the temple. The Jewish people are taken in shackles and brought east to Babylon. They come there, and they already see a thriving Jewish community. There's shuls, and there's delis, and there's bagels, and there's all the institutions already there, and the Jewish people will almost not miss a beat in their spiritual lives because they're going to have great leaders in Babylon. But no temple, and they're going to have to adjust to this life without a temple, and the prophecy, or the era of prophecy, is already waning. We're going to have 70 years of exile in Babylon. There's still some Jews left in Israel, but the vast majority of Jews are in Babylon. It's going to be a stable time period. We're going to see a turnover of the Persian Empire overrunning the Babylonian Empire, and we're going to have the time period of Purim. Purim, where the years given is the year 355 before the Common Era. Before that, we're going to have the emperor, the Persian emperor whose name was, I think, Cyrus. Is that right? Cyrus?
Yeah, and he lets them go back.
He's going to let them go back to Israel to rebuild the temple. Zerubbabel, a fellow by the name of Zerubbabel, who may or may not be Ezra, according to the Talmud. Maybe Ezra, maybe Nehemiah. There's a whole debate who he is. Maybe he's we know nothing about him other than he led the contingency of 42,000 people heading back to Israel. They start building the temple, but remember, the Samaritans are now living in Israel. They're the ones who came over when the Assyrians did that merry-go-round, and they took the nations of the north of Israel, the 10 tribes, and sent them out. They brought a group of people called the Samaritans, or the Kusim. They brought them in their stead. They may or may not have converted. The Talmud always has these debate what to do with the Kusim, because they may have converted, but it may have been an insincere conversion. There's a whole debate. Are they true converts, or are they only converts of lions? So what that means is either that there were actual lions there that just freaked them out and they converted, or lions, when you're scared of a lion, they only convert out of fear, so to speak. They want to be accepted amongst the Jews, so they convert out of fear. So these people, these Samaritans, have a half status, where you have to treat them as Jews, but you're not so sure if they're super sincere in the conversion. So the Talmud always talks about kusim. What do you do with it? It's up in the air. You don't know. They're Jewish or they're not Jewish. We don't know. But they're there, and they're going to be a major thorn in the side of the Jewish people. Jewish people are going to get bad. They're going to have a mandate to build a temple from Cyrus in the year 370. They start building the temple in earnest, and the kusim say, no, we want to be part of it. Initially, the kusim, the Samaritans are on board. Eventually, they feel jilted, so they go and they rebel, and they fight, and they eventually convince the permission they have, the permission to build a temple revoked. Construction of the temple is halted temporarily. Back in Babylon, you have the Persian episode with Achashverosh and Haman, and the book of Esther tells the whole story in great detail. Mordechai, a great leader. Miraculous events. The Jewish people are spared. And eventually, in about the year 350 or 352, a construction on the second temple is resumed, and it is rebuilt. A couple of years later, Ezra, great leader, Ezra comes back with a great contingency of people with him. A couple of years later, he's followed by Nehemiah, and from this point on, we're going to have two independent communities of Jewish life, one in Israel with the temple, and a much larger contingency of Jews in Babylon that is going to be coexisting, independent, even though there was lots of flow of people and ideas between the two, but two coexisting independent Jewish communities that are going to exist for a very, very long time. In fact, the community in Babylon that existed, it was around till modern times, till contemporary times. The Jews living in Iraq and in Baghdad, and not quite Syria, but further east. Till modern times. And they built these tremendous yeshivas like Sura and Pumbedisa, these major institutions that had thousands upon thousands of students that were around for 1,000 years. Like massive institutions, or even more than 1,000 years.
Saddam kicked them all out, didn't he?
Yeah, well, in the 1950s, a lot of them came to Israel. And there was this,
I read this book, it's Kurdish Jews. There are like 30,000 Kurdish Jews who spoke Aramaic.
Yeah, well, that was the language of the land. That's what the Talmud that was written. Talmud was written about 1,000 years after the period that we're up to right now, was written in Aramaic because that was the language of the land in Babylon.
There was a recent book where the kid was checking his history of his father became a professor of Aramaic at UCLA. He was a Kurdish Jew that went.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, but till today,
Paradise of my father.
Till today, we read the Talmud. We speak Aramaic. We have we could actually watch the Passion of the Christ without subtitles. Well, that's a joke. That was a joke. Let it go. I'm just trying to have a moment of too far. Okay, a moment of levity.
It's been the day of dead
I know.
babies and
Yeah, okay.
jokes.
So I just want to leave off with this, and I'll get to your question, David. I want to leave off with this moment of great transition. We have two interdependent, but also independent communities. A much larger one. You think about it, it's like remarkable. The Jews were able to establish or reestablish sovereignty in Israel, or sovereignty, I don't know about sovereignty, but at least a community in Israel, and the vast majority of Jews opted to stay in Babylon, which is eerily similar to what happened in Israel. We were allowed to go back to Israel, and history will judge us for saying, why were there so many Jews who stayed in Houston and New York and in England and everywhere? Like, what were they thinking? Like, from a historical perspective, we're going to be judged the same way that we judge today all the people in Babylon. Like, you finally were able to go back to Israel. Why did you not choose to go back? And the answer was very similar, because it was very good for them in Babylon. They had freedom. It wasn't quite a golden age, but it was a time where they had stability. They had freedom. The Babylonians and the Persians were kind of said, live and let live. We let you could develop your institutions. They had formal recognition, political recognition with the Reish Galusa, who was kind of the head of diaspora. And it was really good for them, and only like about 5% of them actually went back with Ezra and reestablished that second temple in a second commonwealth in Israel.
What was that word?
Commonwealth.
Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Not kibbutz.
David. Oh no, that comes much later. David.
Just since you mentioned the temples, didn't I read I read somewhere there was a practice at some point of animal sacrifice in the temples.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
When and why did that practice end?
It ended when the temple was destroyed.
The first one?
Second temple.
The second one.
Yes. Yes. Animal sacrifice was what they did in the temple.
And if it were rebuilt, they'd do it again.
So that's actually a debate. Okay. It's a debate. Maimonides says that perhaps they won't, but most likely they will. Yeah.
That's my next question: is where do you stand on the temple being built for the third time?
Oh yeah, it's going to happen. So we're halfway there. Like if someone told you 100 years ago that we'd actually have Jerusalem and we'd be on the doorstep of the temple, on Temple Mount, people wouldn't believe you. Mm-hmm. We're already halfway there. We already have Israel. We have 6 million Jews in Israel. We have control over Israel. It's like that. It can happen.
Does it have to be Temple Mount?
Oh yeah, it's going to be Temple Mount. It's going to be Temple Mount. Temple Mount. We're going to do some excavation. It's not a big deal. It's happened before.
How do you think you're going to get that Temple Mount?
What's the big deal? You take a bulldozer. You lift up the shrine. Now, remember in Jewish life, in Jewish philosophy, we're very thankful to the shrine because it's protected by the Muslims. Do a much better job than the modern Israelis would do in protecting the sanctity and the holiness of these spaces. Yeah. And Jews are not allowed to go there. Jews are not allowed to go to Temple Mount. So if you ever go visit Israel, don't go there because as Jews you're not allowed to go there yet in ritual impurity because the site maintains its holiness. So yes, we're very thankful to the Muslims, but remember, there was such doubt as to whether or not we'd ever conquer Jerusalem or the Old City or the Golan Heights or the Sinai. We have it all now, so we're there. All we need is just one minor provocation, but no, we look at when we're spiritually ready for rebuilding the temple, then all the physical things, all the physical items will line up. But we see it's not so hard to see it. In about 3 minutes, the Israeli army can clear away the Temple Mount and start construction. About 3 minutes. So physically, we're very capable. Spiritually, when we're ready, we'll do it.
The cornerstone has already been laid until
what do you mean?
For the third temple.
Yeah, well, there's some fanatics that want to jump the gun.
You meant the Temple Institute or other people?
No, not the Temple Institute.
No,
people,
not Temple Institute. No, who's that?
I'm
group?
talking. Well, there's always these groups that say let's just do it. Let's just bulldoze them. It's impractical. It's imprudent. It's don't jump the gun. When we're spiritually ready for it, we'll know when the time has come. But we're there. It's not. You don't have to really jump through any loopholes to jump through major hoops to see how physically it's going to happen. But yes, absolutely. Of course, we're going to rebuild the temple. It's been the yearning for the Jewish people for millennia. Well, we're almost there. It's incredible. That's the idea of Mashiach. Yes, absolutely.
Was there a process for verification of the prophet? I mean,
yes.
Like,
yes. Well, maybe we could talk about this some other time. But Maimonides gives us the instructions of how a prophet gets prophecy, and what he does, and how he proves himself, etc. Yeah, absolutely. So if you or I were to go into the temple or to go into the court and say we're prophets, they would just put us away.
Well, and even further back, it's talked about in Deuteronomy. Also.
Yeah, it's
like,
instruction
that's
how
we. It's like I love Maimonides, and that's wonderful, but I don't care so much. Like he gave wonderful wisdom.
Yeah, well, he organized it.
Thousands of years after.
Of course, he organized it for us.
What Dan is going to be, and what I feel like Dan's looking for is where does it say in contemporary time, like basically these people that we've canonized as prophets and taken their books into the Tanakh. Yeah. What were the standards for judging those guys? And Maimonides, though valuable, is not.
But Moses is called.
Moses in Deuteronomy.
Moses is called the father of prophets. Right. Moses called the father of prophets. All those that preceded him and all those that came afterwards.
Yeah.
we mentioned this, I think, last time.
Yeah.
Moses is a verified prophet. So therefore, when
Yeah.
Moses tells us that Abraham is a prophet, we believe it, not because of Abraham, because of Moses.
So Deuteronomy.
Moses also lays down the requirements, the criteria for future prophets. All future prophets are kind of descendants of so to speak, spiritual descendants of Moses, because Moses told us how to verify and how to clarify what they are. But
Yeah.
Maimonides organizes
Right.
them. Exactly.
It's a better statement, but
Yes,
if you're
organize
looking
them.
to line up chronology, you want
So
to
that's
do
that. So
Deuteronomy.
I think that what I would really, really love is that we could have, I know we only slated 2 sessions on history. I think it's very important. We kind of are able to touch on a lot of things. Maybe we could, we'll try to find a part 3. Okay.
This was really interesting.
Yes, very
Yeah,
interesting.
fascinating.
As
Anybody's
usual.
interested in that, the name of the book is My Father's Paradise.
And Torch Annual Gala. I really, really want everyone to attend. It'll be a tremendous support for us as an organization, but also for me personally. So
Let me know if you're going so we can coordinate the.
yes,
Yeah,
we want. I want to have a.
if I can sit with people. I
Yes,
know.
yes.
Yeah.
There's going to be
David's
3.
on host table. I'm on host table. We want to try to get everyone together.
Yes, we're gonna. I want to have 2 or at least 2, but hopefully even 3 TBT tables. We're gonna show them. Humble power. Okay.
You know, the Turks did the same
It
thing.
is Wednesday night,
Oh yeah.
When Ataturk
November
took over,
19.
he took the desert tribes and put them down in Samsun.
Yeah.
And a
It's
fisherman
brilliant.
tribe
It's brilliant.
back up into the desert.
It's brilliant.
What a mess, though.
Yeah, it's a mess, but it's great for the conqueror. You know.
Yeah, well,